It's April 20th, and whether you're, partaking or just scrolling online, you definitely see it everywhere. 420.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's inescapable in cannabis culture.
Right.
So ingrained.
Right. It's almost invisible because it's so present. But have you ever actually stopped and thought, why that number? What's the real story there?
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. Yeah. We've looked through quite a bit, articles, reports, online chatter, trying to sort of sift through the legends and get to the history of 420. The goal isn't just to say this happened, but to understand how this seemingly random number got so big.
Okay, yeah. So we're going back to the start, like the story about those high school kids, the Waldos.
Exactly. We'll dig into that, the most accepted origin, but also look at, a competing claim that popped up and tackle some of those wild myths, or quite a few, then figure out how the Grateful Dead fit in, which is pretty interesting. Yeah. And just trace how it went from this a local code to this massive global thing.
All right, let's do it. It feels like there's definitely more to this than just a number.
For sure. And yeah, the best place to start is with the folks usually credited, the Waldos, Centerville High School.
Okay.
Picture it. Fall 71, Marin County, California. 5 high schoolers, Steve Capper, Dave Reddix, Jeffrey Knoll, Larry Schwartz, Mark Gravich.
The Waldos. Why that name?
Pretty simple, actually. They used to hang out by a wall after school, near campus. So Waldos.
Oh, okay. Makes sense. So the Waldos, hanging by the wall, how does this lead to, 420? Was it the map?
Yes. This is where it gets good. They got this hand-drawn map. Supposedly, it led to an abandoned cannabis patch way out on the Point Reyes Peninsula.
No way. A treasure map. Who gave it to them?
Came from a classmate. Apparently, his brother-in-law was in the Coast Guard, planted this patch, but then got worried he'd get busted for it. So he basically said, hey, someone else can harvest it, and the map ends up with the Waldos. Talk about a quest for some teenagers.
Seriously. That's movie stuff. So they have the map. How did 4:20 p.m. get involved?
Just practicality, really. 4:20 p.m. was their meeting time at the Louis Pasteur statue on campus.
Why then specifically?
Well, school was over. Right. And most after-school stuff, like sports practice or whatever, was usually done by then.
Okay.
So it gave them this little window to meet up, maybe, get in the mood for the search, and then head out towards Point Reyes before it got too late and, parents started wondering.
4:20 Louis, that was the original code, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. 4:20 Louis, that was their reminder. Yeah. Meet at the statue at 4:20. But the funny thing is, they kept searching for this patch.
No. Did they find it?
Nope. Week after week, apparently. Yeah. Nothing. They never found the patch.
Oh, man. All that effort.
I know, but the code kind of stuck around. It just got shortened to 420, and it became their, private slang for anything cannabis related.
Okay. So not just the meeting time anymore.
Right. It became the code for, hey, want to smoke? Or just talk about weed in general. Super useful for keeping things discreet back then with the legal risks and all.
Needed a code. Makes sense. It's interesting how it morphed from the specific mission time to just the general activity.
Exactly. So that's the core story. The Waldos, the map, the failed search, the code being born.
Right. Okay. But how do we know this isn't just a great story they made up years later? Did they have proof?
That's the key question, isn't it? And yeah, the Waldos have actually been pretty proactive about backing up their claim. They argue they have actual physical proof from way back then.
Like what kind of proof? Old notebooks?
Better. They've got things like postmarked letters, other stuff from the early 70s where they actually use 420 when talking about weed.
Really?
Yeah. And apparently it's clear from the context it was their code. They keep this stuff safe, like in a bank vault.
Wow. Okay. A vault. Serious stuff.
And then there's the 420 flag.
A flag?
Yeah. A handmade batik flag has 420 on it, a cannabis leaf, supposedly made by a classmate back in 72. And there are reports that, school records helped verify when it was made.
A flag from 72. That's pretty compelling evidence. Anything else?
Well, there's a story about one of them using 420 in the school newspaper back then, in a quote or something.
Yeah.
Very informal, but still, print. And maybe the biggest thing in 2016, they actually tracked down Gary Newman.
Who's Gary Newman?
He's the brother-in-law of the Coast Guard guy, the one who drew the original map. And he went on camera, confirmed the whole story. The map, the patch, giving permission, third-party validation.
Okay, that's pretty solid. They really went the distance to prove it.
They did. And it's gained recognition. The Oxford English Dictionary, when they added 420 in 2017, they specifically mentioned the Waldos and cited their documents as evidence for the term's earliest use. Plus, tons of news outlets have looked into it over the years, and, well, most conclude the Waldo's story holds up best.
So the weight of evidence seems pretty clearly on their side.
It definitely leans that way.
But like you said, it's not the only story out there. What about this Biebs controversy? Who are they?
Right, the Biebs. This is another group from Santa Fe High around the same time, and they basically say, hold on, we started it. Or rather, one of them did.
Oh.
A guy named Brad Bann, nicknamed the Bieb. Their claim is that he coined 420, but a year earlier than the Waldos, like back in 1970.
1970. Okay, so what's their version of events?
According to Bann, it was totally spontaneous, just a Saturday afternoon, hanging out, smoking weed at his friend Dan Dixon's house in Peacock Gap.
Okay.
Dixon answers, Bann looks, it's 4:20 p.m. And he just jokingly says something like, time to load some bong loads. That was supposedly the spark.
It's just an offhand comment.
That's their story. And they say their circle started using it, and maybe the Waldos heard it from them.
Interesting. Do they have any proof? Like the Waldos do?
Well, they have testimony. Dan Dixon backs up Bann's story. Another friend, Guy Perry, supports it too. He even self-published a book arguing their case.
Mm-hmm.
And their main piece of physical evidence is a photo, supposedly from a school barn dance in May 1971.
Yeah. What's the photo show?
They claim it shows Dan Dixon with a piece of tape on his shirt and 420 written on it. If that date is right, May 71, it would predate the Waldo's Fall 71 map quest.
God, that barn dance photo sounds like a potential wrinkle. How do the Waldos respond to all this?
They strongly push back. They question if bongs were really that common in San Rafael in 1970, like the Biebs suggest. And they raise doubts about that barn dance photo, its date, authenticity.
Right.
And interestingly, there's someone the Biebs mentioned, Chris Saunders. He reportedly said he did hear 420 early on, but he heard it as 420 Louis.
From who?
From Dan Dixon, one of the Biebs. But in 1972, which, if true, actually links it back to the Waldos' specific Louis Pasteur statute code.
So even that testimony is a bit tangled.
It is. But what's clear, despite the disagreement on who exactly coined it and when,
Yeah.
both stories put the origin squarely at Santa Fe High School in the early 70s, which kind of shoots down all those other wilder theories about where it came from.
Right, it pins it to that time and place. Okay, well, let's talk about those wilder theories then. That early confusion definitely left room for myths to grow.
Oh, absolutely. With no clear story out there initially, people just filled in the blanks, and some of those myths are really persistent.
Okay, let's bust a few. The police code one, that's probably the most common, right? 420 is police code for weed.
Classic, yeah. Totally busted. There's no universal police code 420 for marijuana, like we mentioned in SF. Maybe juvenile disturbance, but definitely not weed. It's the Waldo's meeting time.
Okay, not police code. What about the number of chemicals in cannabis? 420 compounds.
Another popular one, also wrong. Cannabis has way more than 500 compounds identified. Cannabinoids specifically. Maybe around 100, give or take. Nowhere near 420. Just doesn't match the science.
Got it. Not science. Then there's the Bob Dylan theory.
Yes. Rainy day women, hashtag 12 and 35. Because 12 times 35 equals 420.
Right. Is there anything to that?
It's a fun coincidence,
Yeah.
mathematically. But Dylan's never said anything about it. It's pure speculation. Highly unlikely origin.
Okay. And Bob Marley, people try to connect it to him too, right?
Yeah, either his birthday or death date. But Marley was born Feb 6th, died May 11th. Neither is April 20th. Just doesn't line up. Another myth.
And the Hitler's birthday one, that comes up sometimes.
It does. April 20th is Hitler's birthday. But it's purely coincidence. Zero connection to the Waldos in 71. It is, however, tragically also the date of the Columbine Massacre, which is a completely separate, somber association.
Right. Okay, what about the California Penal Code? That one sounds kind of plausible. Section 420 for marijuana.
Yeah, that fools a lot of people. But no, there was no Penal Code 420 for marijuana back then.
Yeah.
Much later, California passed Senate Bill 420 for medical marijuana. But he named it after the term was already famous. It was a nod to the culture, not the origin of the culture.
Okay, so the law came after the slang. Got it. Any other weird ones? Amsterdam tea time. LSD trips.
Yeah, you hear those occasionally. Tea time in Amsterdam, Albert Hoffman's first acid trip, all sorts of fringe ideas, but none have any real evidence linking them back to the actual start of 420 for weed. Just urban legends, really.
It's amazing how these stories stick around, though. Why do you think they lasted so long?
Well, think about it before the internet. Verifying stuff was hard, right?
True.
Information spread word of mouth, especially in, like, underground communities. And a cool, memorable story, even if wrong, that travels faster than a complicated, maybe less exciting truth.
Worth point.
Plus, 420 was a code. People using it maybe weren't inclined to question its origin too much. They just needed the code. Once a myth gets going, it just builds momentum. Hard to stop.
Yeah, cultural inertia. Makes sense. Okay, so we've got the Waldos, the most likely originators. But how did their little code get out of San Rafael and go, well, global? The Grateful Dead connection seems huge here.
Absolutely pivotal. 420 starts as this super niche slang. Just the Waldos and maybe their immediate friends, getting it out to the wider counterculture. That happened largely because of their ties to the Grateful Dead.
Who were based right there in Marin County, too, right? Near the high school.
Perfect proximity. It wasn't just geographical, though. There were personal links.
Like what?
Okay, so Dave Reddix, one of the Waldos, his older brother Patrick, good friends with Phil Lesh, the Dead's bassist. Patrick even managed some of Phil's side bands. And Dave himself later worked as a roadie for Lesh.
Oh, wow. Direct connection.
Yeah, and another Waldo, Mark Gravich, his dad was in real estate, and he actually helped the Grateful Dead find places, like rehearsal spaces, storage, so the Waldos had this kind of access.
So they were literally hanging out with the Dead. Backstage, rehearsals, that kind of thing?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Because of those connections, they were around the band, the crew, in these informal settings. And naturally, they'd use their slang. Passing a joint, maybe saying, hey, 420, or just referring to weed that way.
And it just caught on from there, within the Dead scene.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The band members, the roadies, they picked it up. And crucially, so did the fans, the Deadheads.
Right, the Deadheads. They were famous for traveling everywhere, following the band.
Precisely. A huge, mobile, very connected community, deeply immersed in that culture, including cannabis use. They became like the perfect distribution network for the term. Unintentionally, of course. They just spread it organically as they traveled and connected with each other. Phil Lesh even acknowledged knowing Patrick Reddix well, though he couldn't recall the exact first time he heard 420.
So the Deadheads basically took it national within that counterculture world.
You could say that. The whole Grateful Dead ecosystem acted like this massive amplifier. By the 80s, early 90s, 420 wasn't just San Rafael slang anymore. It was a widely understood term in the American counterculture.
Okay, so Deadheads spread the word. But how did it jump from, the Deadlots to being everywhere, and specifically tied to April 20th? High Times magazine seems key here.
Yes, High Times. That's the next big leap. The magazine was already, the publication for cannabis culture by the early 90s, and a specific event involving them really cemented the April 20th connection and pushed 420 into the mainstream.
What was the event? Tell us about that.
Okay, so December 1990, a Grateful Dead show in Oakland. Flyers start showing up in the parking lot scene, the lot.
Yeah. What did the flyer say?
This is the crucial part. It invited people to meet up at 420 on 420 for 420, specifically in Marin County at a spot called Bolinas Ridge on Mount Tamalpais for sunset.
Oh, so it explicitly linked the time, 4.20, to the date, 420, and called for a gathering.
Exactly. That was the connection right there. It wasn't just about smoking at 420 anymore. It was about celebrating on 420. The flyer probably also mentioned one of the myths about the origin, just to add some flavor.
Okay, so this flyer is circulating. How does High Times get involved?
One of those flyers landed in the hands of Steve Bloom. He was a reporter and editor there at the time. He saw it, thought it was interesting, this call for 420 on 420.
And he wrote about it.
He did. He basically just transcribed the flyer's text and printed it in the May 1991 issue of High Times. Putting that out there in that magazine, that was huge exposure.
I bet. That must have blown it up way beyond the Deadhead scene.
Totally transformative. After that, High Times just ran with it. They started using 420 all the time, promoting 420 events. Given their reach, internationally even, that pushed the term and the April 20th date into much wider consciousness. It wasn't just a Deadhead thing anymore.
And did High Times ever clarify the origin story, since the flyer probably had a myth?
Yeah, later on they did. In 1998, Steve Hager, another key figure at the magazine, spearheaded an article that really dug into it and credited the Waldos as the originators. So they helped set the record straight eventually.
It's amazing, though, just one anonymous flyer picked up by the right magazine.
Right. It really shows how powerful niche media can be in shaping culture. High Times legitimized it. But yeah, whoever made and handed out those flyers in 1990, they played a massive role in turning 4:20 p.m. into April 20th, the holiday.
So the flyer in High Times really kicked off April 20th as the day. How did it evolve from there into the, unofficial holiday it is now?
Well, That initial push was the catalyst, and the fact that the date, 420, mirrors the number, that definitely helped make it stick, especially in the U.S. date format.
Yeah, easy to remember.
So through the 90s and 2000s, it just grew. Those early meetups inspired more. It became this, unofficial international holiday for cannabis folks.
What do the celebrations look like these days? Is it just people getting together to smoke?
It's a whole range, really. You still have the big public gatherings, think Hippie Hill in San Francisco,
Mm-hmm.
or historically, the big smokeouts at places like CU Boulder. Often there's that moment at 4:20 p.m. where everyone partakes together.
Right.
But it's also concerts, festivals, cultural events,
Hmm.
and still very much a day for activism. Rallies, protests, pushing for legalization or drug policy reform. It keeps both the celebration and the political edge.
And how has legalization changed things now that it's legal in so many places?
That's had a huge impact. While it definitely holds on to those counterculture roots, it's still a statement of conscience. For many, legalization has made it much more mainstream.
Less rebellious, maybe?
In some ways, yeah. It's become a big commercial event, too. Dispensaries run huge 420 sales, brands launch campaigns. It's a major sales day for the legal industry. And you see 420 friendly everywhere now, right? Hotels, rentals. It signals acceptance.
It's really gone from underground code to mainstream marketing term.
It really has. You even see weird little nods, like California naming that medical marijuana law Senate Bill 420,
Mm-hmm.
or that activist in D.C. getting the license plate 420. It shows how symbols from the fringe can get absorbed, even commodified, as society changes. It's that classic pattern.
A fascinating journey for a number. Okay, so let's wrap this up. What are the main takeaways from this deep dive into 420?
Well, I think the clearest thing is that the Waldo story, starting in San Rafael High in '71, holds the most weight as the origin. They've got the evidence, the consistency.
Right. Though we acknowledge the Biebs claim too, which also
Mhm.
points to the same time and place.
Exactly, both rooted there. And then the spread. You can't overstate the Grateful Dead connection for getting it into the counterculture.
And High Times and that flyer for blowing it up mainstream and tying it to April 20th.
Absolutely. Those were the key steps from local slang to global phenomenon.
It really is incredible thinking about it. Just some teenagers, a code word for a funny adventure.
Right. And it becomes this worldwide symbol. As Waldo Steve Capper said, it's a phenomenon. And today, while the history is cool, for most people, 420 is about community, celebrating freedom, the whole legalization movement. Its meaning keeps evolving.
It really does. So as we finish up, maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Think about how something small, something local, like a high school code, can ripple outwards and end up having this huge cultural impact, even changing laws eventually.
Yeah, and how the meaning of these symbols can shift so much over time, way beyond what the originators ever imagined.
Makes you wonder what little codes or trends are starting right now that might become something massive down the road. Definitely something to think about.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.